The girl took off her high heels, and the next moment, a pair of chubby legs landed on the ground. How did the beautiful girl turn into a chubby girl? It turned out that the red high heels were what made her beautiful. She was actually Snow White. On her 18th birthday, a soldier captured a witch. The king was captivated by the witch's beauty and married her. Soon after, strange things happened. People in the palace disappeared, one after another, leaving only the king and Snow White. The king finally realized that everything was the witch's doing. To protect his daughter, the king sent Snow White out of the palace, and since then, the king also disappeared, and the witch completely took over the palace. To maintain her eternal youth, the witch planted an apple tree, and the apples it bore would turn into high heels. Whoever wore them would become the most beautiful woman in the world. Yes, change me. Ah, finally. But in the end, the witch still failed, and each time she failed, she would vent her anger on the little monkeys. Just last night, Snow White secretly sneaked into the palace and discovered the apple tree. She reached out to pick an apple when the witch also arrived. A flash of light passed, and Snow White transformed into a slender maiden with a pair of red shoes on her feet. The witch furiously attacked Snow White, but luckily, at the crucial moment, she escaped the palace on a broomstick. What angered the witch even more was that the magic tree she had painstakingly cultivated had completely withered. Meanwhile, the dwarves had just returned home and found the broomstick on the tree. They thought a thief had broken in and angrily pushed open the door. However, the dwarves were all captivated by Snow White's beauty. To win the beauty's favor, they began to prepare delicious food and even gave her a diamond ring the size of a goose egg. But these were not what Snow White wanted. She only wanted to find her father quickly. It turned out that last night she had not only discovered the magic book, but also the diary left by the king. The diary stated that he had been cursed by the witch, and only by finding the legendary 7 heroes could they defeat the queen and save the entire kingdom. Little did Snow White know, the 7 dwarfs before her were the legendary 7 warriors. During a mission to rescue a princess, they found her so ugly that they ended up getting rid of her too. Enraged, the princess cursed them. Anyone who saw them would see them as ugly green dwarfs, and the only way to break the curse was a kiss of true love. Snow White's appearance made them believe they had found true love, and they showered her with attention from morning till night. That evening, Snow White spotted her father and chased after him, but instead of finding her father, she encountered a large rabbit. "Wooden bunny, you're a nice bunny." In a moment of crisis, Merlin appeared and rescued Snow White. The two fled desperately. When Snow White wasn't looking at him, he transformed into a handsome prince. When she turned around, she saw the rabbit still chasing them. Merlin told Snow White to run ahead and not look back, no matter what. Merlin transformed into a prince. His power greatly increased. Just as he was about to counterattack, Snow White was chased into a dead end. The rabbit jumped in front of Snow White. In the nick of time, Arthur leaped forward with his sword. Luckily, the other dwarfs arrived and took the rabbit back home. The next day, Snow White, carrying a portrait of her father, went to the city with the dwarfs to search for him. Being a beautiful woman felt amazing. Not only did strangers give her gifts, but she also received free food. A man was proposing marriage, but when Snow White passed by, she completely captivated him, making him forget his wife and even laugh. Even a master sculptor made a statue in Snow White's image. Snow White was searching for her father in the city when she suddenly discovered she was a wanted criminal. 2 soldiers spotted her, but Snow White ran into a dead end. As the soldiers slowly approached, at the crucial moment, Snow White saw a mirror. The soldiers pushed aside the mirror, only to find a chubby little girl. Realizing they had the wrong person, they angrily left. Snow White had taken off her high heels, and the crisis was finally averted. But suddenly, another group of soldiers took her shoes. The soldiers, seeing her as a chubby girl, teased her. "Please give them back to me. They won't even fit you." Hey? At this moment, Merlin and Arthur passed by, and Snow White asked them for help, but she had become fat, and the two didn't recognize her at all. The soldiers continued to harass her, so Snow White headbutted one of the soldiers, but she was cornered by the other soldiers. Fortunately, Merlin arrived and returned the shoes to Snow White. Merlin couldn't have imagined that this chubby girl was his goddess, and although he didn't recognize her, he still chose to help her. Snow White put on the shoes and transformed back into a goddess. It turned out that she and the dwarves had known each other before, and they all pursued her because of her beauty, but only Merlin truly touched her heart. To help Snow White find her father, she drew a huge missing person poster in a flower bed. Snow White was very moved, and was about to give him a kiss of true love, but was interrupted by Arthur's arrival. Snow White shyly turned and left, but she didn't know that Merlin wasn't in his true form. He was a cursed prince, who would turn into a dwarf whenever he was seen, and only a kiss of true love could break the curse. From then on, Merlin began to fantasize about being with Snow White. That night, he explained to Snow White that his current appearance wasn't his true form, but Snow White believed that his current appearance was the most real, saying, "I like you the way you are now." Merlin was stunned, but he didn't believe her. Then Snow White wanted Merlin to see her true form, but the red shoes wouldn't come off, so Merlin took out a chainsaw. The next day, the three dwarf brothers invented a printing press, and Merlin took Snow White flying through the air to distribute flyers, and their feelings for each other gradually deepened. At dusk, they had a date by the river. Snow White folded the charm Merlin gave her into a small flower, and then gave it to Merlin with a kiss. Merlin secretly kissed her several times when Snow White wasn't paying attention, but found that the curse hadn't been broken. As the sun set, in the romantic atmosphere, the two fell in love. Merlin covered Snow White's eyes, wanting to surprise him, but when Snow White opened his eyes, Merlin was still in the form of a dwarf. He didn't know what had gone wrong, but before he could figure out the reason, a giant wooden monster suddenly appeared. Merlin quickly took Snow White and ran away, but soon two more appeared. In this critical moment, Merlin told Snow White not to look back, planning to let Snow White go first, while he stayed behind to cover their retreat. Sure enough, Merlin transformed into a prince, gained immense power, and easily defeated the wooden monsters. But when Merlin let his guard down, the wooden monsters grabbed him and dragged him into the water. Seeing this, Snow White jumped into the river without hesitation, only to see Merlin pinned down by a large rock. Snow White used all his strength to try and move the rock, but it wouldn't budge. Seeing that Merlin was about to die, Snow White took off his shoes and, using his strength as a chubby girl, rescued Merlin from the water. Merlin saw his true appearance, and at that moment, he finally understood why the curse hadn't been broken, because his love for Snow White wasn't true love. He thought about it all night and finally left in disappointment. Snow White also knew that no one would like him if he took off his shoes, so he put them back on. Merlin, on his way back, had an argument with himself. Finally, the dwarf Merlin asked the ultimate question: "Who do you like more, Snow White or Red Snow?" Simple. Red Snow. Then who do you think Red Snow likes more, you or me? Simple. Of course, me. Wait, no, it's you. Merlin, who only cared about appearances, suddenly woke up. He finally understood his true feelings. Meanwhile, Snow White met another Merlin. He handed Snow White a red apple, and just as Snow White was about to eat it, the real Merlin arrived. Terrible timing you have. The witch kidnapped Snow White. Merlin rode a rabbit towards the palace, but the rabbit suddenly turned. "Wait, you're running the wrong way. The castle is over there." It turned out to be a secret passage. The witch offered Snow White an apple, but Snow White refused to eat it, even preferring death. Unexpectedly, the witch captured Merlin and used him to threaten Snow White. She forced Snow White to make a choice. To protect Merlin, Snow White had no choice but to eat the apple. The next second, her body hardened, her limbs stiffened, and she turned into a tree. On the other side, Merlin was firmly trapped by the magic mirror. The magic mirror told him that Snow White would turn into an apple tree after eating the apple, and when the sunlight shone on it, the apples would ripen and turn into red high heels. Once the witch picked the apples, Snow White's life would come to an end. Merlin struggled desperately. "You don't have to do this. Just take the shoes and let us go." But the magic mirror said that the shoes fed on human desires, and once worn, they could never be taken off. Merlin was stunned. He remembered that Snow White had taken off her shoes to save him before. It turned out that in Snow White's heart, Merlin was far more important than the shoes. Merlin wanted to save Snow White, and he was about to escape, but then the magic mirror said, "Ha ha ha, it's gonna hurt." He was trapped again by the magic mirror. At the critical moment, the other 6 dwarves arrived and rescued Merlin. At this time, the apple tree that Snow White had become grew shoes. The witch reached out to pick them, but little did she know that Merlin had already arrived. He pushed the witch away, took one last look at Snow White, and then pushed the witch off the cliff. As countless spells rained down from the sky, Merlin began to cast a spell to detonate them. The witch was destroyed, and his magic was also dispelled. The large rabbit returned to its original form, revealing that the king they had been searching for was right beside them. Snow White also transformed back into a human. Overjoyed, she embraced her father, but before long, she realized Merlin was gone. Her father, feeling guilty, recounted what had just happened. Snow White, heartbroken, called out for Merlin at the edge of the cliff. Just as Snow White was overcome with grief, the 3 dwarf brothers brought Merlin up using a machine. However, he was now on the verge of death, still tightly clutching the small flower Snow White had given him. As Merlin passed away, the flower in his hand floated into the air. Snow White sadly kissed him goodbye, but this kiss unexpectedly broke the curse, and Merlin transformed back into a prince and woke up. It turned out that the moment Merlin realized his true feelings, they were destined to be together, and Snow White's kiss at that moment broke the curse. The 2 happily embraced, and their friends rejoiced for them. Finally, Snow White and Merlin walked down the aisle, and the other 6 dwarfs also found their true loves later on. Years later, another shallow person who judged others based on appearance rejected the witch princess, resulting in him being cursed and transformed into an ugly green dwarf.